Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, my precious pack, and welcome back once more to Vega Conflict. And it's time for the recommended targets. Actually, I'm going to be recommending the Umbral Obsidian targets. Not due to difficulty, not due to the drops or anything like that, but because I've been messing around with the operators, and despite the fact that they're a gamble every single fight as to whether you're going to take damage or not, I have at least found a use for them. And that is rushing the infestor fleets. And as I said in the video yesterday, I was going to be talking about what to be farming for in the upcoming week. So, what are the obsidian targets? Well, they're a collection of Valravens, gargoyles, and a small group of operators at the very beginning of the fight. Due to how the fleets are set up, thankfully, you should be able to avoid most damage if you use a segfault. Or, alternatively, the faster way, and the way that I'd recommend instead of this way, this video serves a two-point purpose. One, to do the recommendations targets from stuff I've been farming just for a bit of fun. Well, bit of fun being a relatively lightly used term there. But it serves to also point out that you should use the Orator and Ericos because the spawn ships mixed with the Orator just being able to run down the ships and just crush them, unlike the Segfault, which currently struggles against most of the targets and takes a lot more damage for its fights if you don't fly around in phase. It is more encouraging to use the Orator and Ericos if possible. Now, the reason for that, and the reason I'm doing this, is because I wanted to show something for the development team as well. The time difference between an Orator farming these targets with Ericos just spamming ships out to tank damage for them and take virtually nothing in return, compared to a Segfault. Taking your time with most of the fights, for the lower level fights, you'll take about 5 minutes per fight. That isn't ideal because you need to farm 30 targets to get 6 Mark IIs. Now you multiply it out, 5 by 30, well, you already know it's going to be a grind. And it gets worse because it goes 30, 60, 90, 120. That's only up for the Mark V. You still have to grind for the Elite one after that. And I'm still doing that. I don't have the timetable currently available. Well, whatever you want to call it. But I don't have it active at the moment, and I'm still farming one. My objective is to farm one Elite one per event moving forwards, because I've been using them to farm the Leviathan targets, well, gambling with the Leviathan targets, and I'm actually thinking of letting them just auto the targets after the initial attack is set up, and then just leaving them. Because they were having absolutely no issues with avoiding damage from the ogres and putting them down in the infestor targets. But in the other ones, they were clumping up and stuff like that. And it's not what I wanted, because I wanted to avoid the area of effect damage, which thankfully, due to how the ogres fight, you're going to be within their firing arcs, well, within their range arcs, for most of the time, and they won't be able to fight back. Only select few will. But the targets, they're tedious and grindy no matter what you're going to choose, because even with the Orator tactic, it's still going to be 3 minutes times 30 targets just to get 6 Mark IIs. And again, the same value applies to the higher level targets, but they take more time. Up towards the Elite target for the Operator, it takes the Segfault 2 attacks in about 6 minutes and 30 seconds on average. And that is playing a little bit risky and trying to aggressively push out and attack the enemy. So, my suggestions for the development team with the Pharmakon's phasing V2 that is... It isn't ideal as it currently is, because it's extremely time-consuming in their fights, and, well, they do need to be reworked again, and most of their abilities, I think, should be focused around them fighting in phase. Because the time that they're in phase, it lasts for such a short time frame now that you don't really get to use it for much unless you're fighting these operators at the beginning of the fight. But when you go up against anything that hits hard, such as a Valraven, they'll punch you once, and you're going to lose about 1/8 of your screen energy from a single shot. And again, this is an Elite Segfault, and it doesn't feel like an Elite Dreadnought. It feels more like a Mark III Behemoth, and Well, for any of you who used those things without knowing exactly how to build them up and farm with them, well, you know that they weren't very useful for much of anything. And when you did find a use for them, it was most likely limited. That's how the segfault feels currently to me. And I'll most likely do a full video recommendation for the segfault as well as Pharmakon for what their phasing could be as the next revamp for them. But most of the abilities I'd rather have them activate while in phase space so that they can at least make use of it, because if they use it out of phase, well, I don't care who you are, they're going to be taking excessive damage because, well, that's just what the development team set them up to do. So it makes no sense to fight out of phase because you're going to be taking more damage than your other factions. You're going to be taking more than the Altairians and more than the Umbral. And I mean, the Umbral, they have the Erico, and it ramps its defenses up to 95%, and it can regenerate that excessively easily. All it has to just do is sit in a blight field. So, let's go ahead, and now with that out of the way, what about the targets? Well, as I said before, they consist of sets of gargoyles, Val Ravens, and a few operators. Nothing's too difficult, nothing that's really a threat, because most of the time you can kite the targets. However, as with this, it's a gamble, because every time you launch squadrons, well, the drones in this case, they can be shot down. There's nothing you can do about it, because that's just how the AI functions. They may choose an extremely horrible flight path and get blown out of the air within 2 seconds after launching, or the Val Ravens may catch your segfault just before you enter exit phase space, and they may shoot it right as squadrons launch, and it instantly destroys them like that, so they don't even get to launch technically. They literally leave the base and then instantly die. So this tactic, again, it's not ideal. This is just showing that it's a chancy thing with the Pharmakon now, that it's not really worth it. And again, just like at the beginning, I would recommend that you use an Orator and Ericos, because you can farm these targets for essentially 3-minute fights with no damage, which is essentially what I'm doing here. I'm doing this entire thing with the intention of taking very low to no damage, and as you can see, it's working fairly well. For most of the targets, it's the same way. However, because most of the Pharmakon abilities are built up around out-of-phasing benefits, it encourages an aggressive playstyle that they're actually not built for, as if the development team hadn't tested them, which is what in my opinion, feels as if it was. But the targets, they're simple, straightforward, and easy. Once you get the hang of them, you should be able to also reduce the amount of time. So in some of the fights, you may be able to run through them with an Orator and Ericos in 2 minutes 30 seconds. In some of the targets, you may be able to run through them where it might take you 4 minutes in 3 minutes. It all just depends on how much practice you've had, as well as what your flight plan is. In my case, as you've noticed, every single time I launch the segfault into the fights, I'm always fighting and setting up the initial fight against the 2 operators so that I can try and get them on the same side of the ship to get them with an AoE and stuff like that, so that they can just take each other out because they're being hit multiple times. That isn't always ideal though, because that doesn't work every single time. And as a few people who've watched the fights have seen, all it takes is one of the operators randomly rushing up to the segfault, and they have seen that before. It goes right up next to the segfault, and it stays within that minimum range where the missiles, well, the binary torpedoes, they do not fire. So that means one entire weapon set is effectively useless, and you have to rely on the drones, which the majority of them has most likely been shot down or heavily damaged. While the rest of them, well, I'm relying on the tick cannons at that point, and well, everyone knows that the tick cannons, they can do good damage against stasis targets, but against fast-moving targets, well, you can't really hit them all that often. So you get good damage against stasis targets, but if they're not stasis, you're not going to be doing much of anything. Also, this is a good way to look at how you approach them. The targets, they are susceptible to stasis, so if you could build a pack of operators, or do something like this 2 Valravens and 4 operators, you should be able to actually rush just about everything in the fleets of these targets because of the phase pool. It has just enough energy, and Mark 3 to Mark 4, Mark 2 being recommended because it's easy to acquire. But you would be able to rush the targets and use the phase pool screen of the 3 slots on each operator to effectively tank the damage and allow you to use the very, very tiny time frame of which you're in phase to close the distance, and then use the exit phase state bonus and burn the ships down instantly. Just snap of a finger, they're all gone. Now, again, that is, a chancy thing. Because when you do that, when you exit phase space to do the damage, you could potentially be shot by the gargoyle and take extremely heavy damage because you have absolutely no blight resistance on your screen, so it'll be doing full damage, and because it's right after you exit phase space, there's a chance that it could completely reset your value of phase and then go over the limit. So let's say you have 1 phase and it's doing 1,000 damage, well, you block 1 point of damage, the other 999 is going to effectively hit, and there's nothing you can do about it. Again, chancy little risk, and it's something the Pharmakon shouldn't have to do. They're supposed to be hit and run, yet their abilities are more focused on get in, hit the target, get out. That feels far too risky, and it's not very rewarding. And despite that, it's how I've been using them, just like with the Infestor targets. And the reason I'm recommending these now. If you don't have elite fleets of Valravens, don't expect to be able to farm it extremely quickly. It took me 2 days getting up and repeating the same thing against the Infestor targets until basically the time I went back to sleep. And again, that was multiple hours each day. Now, naturally, you could run your fleets into the ground of them and repair them, unlike what I did, but since I was around most of the time, it was fairly easy for me to sit around, repair them, while playing a match of Total Annihilation, keeping up with content on the channel and things like that. Well, the comments section, actually. But what you're going to want to do is just be careful with them, because they're a high-risk, high-reward type setup right now. However, due to how the AI targets are made, and how the NPC in this case, there are very few cases, such as this, where you're going to be able to actually utilize the full effect of your Pharmakon nowadays, because you need smaller numbers of targets, and you need to be able to fight them in smaller groups, because your phase pool isn't going to last long, and since you're draining it, and it can be drained extremely quickly due to the very, very small size, it isn't ideal for large targets and high-end targets. They might be extremely good at low-end farming, but if they're all elite and they're only good at low-end farming, well, they're not going to be a very recommendable faction, because, well, if you get them to elite and they can only farm for really low-level targets, what's the point of building them up, correct? Naturally, there's going to be some good things and some bad things about phasing 2.0, but currently what we can take away from it and what we can suggest that the development team do is just increase the screen values or decrease the time that it takes for the drain to occur, because 10 seconds in phase doesn't last very long, and if you get hit by a Valraven, or you get hit by anything else for that matter from tier 8 while you're trying to advance, well, you're going to lose a massive chunk of your phase energy, and that massive chunk may force you out of phase early, and you're going to take an extremely large amount of damage that you can't avoid. So, is it worth using them against most of the targets? No. Just about anyone who's actually smart is using the Orator, Ericos, just about anything that has spawned ships that can actually tank for them, because they don't count as repair time, thankfully, and they allow you to farm easily, unlike with the Segfault. Now, naturally, that could be extremely different. If the Segfault were to be given access to all carrier weapons, with its current phasing style, it would be able to get in, hit the targets due to the range of the weapons, and get out, because it is currently the fastest Pharmakon ship in the game, with a maximum speed of 1,600 meters per second, if I'm not mistaken, at Elite. You mix that with its rapid turn speed, and if you're actively controlling it, you'll be able to farm most of the high-level targets. Well, should be being the key word there. Because it's not guaranteed, because unless you're using some type of beam weapon and you're kiting the enemy, well, It might work out or it might not. However, the difference between the carrier squadron slots and the weapon slots is that the squadron slots are not doubled when they launch, such as its fire arc. As you can see from the wings around it, well, the launch range for the drones, they're not doing all that much. And that ring would also represent carrier weapons if it was being used on it, and it would be a lower range because I'm using the Nightingale drones, and they have 9,000 meters range. All of the carrier weapons for Tier 7 have 8,000 meters range as their max. So the Val Ravens will be able to fire on you at the same time you fire on them. However, because of that, they're also going to begin strafing, so that instantly rules out using the Hammer Missile and the Kaon Driver because they're just going to miss due to how slow they are. And that was a large issue with most of Tier 7 weapons. They were just exceedingly slow, and they were never capable of actually hitting Pharmakon with phasing version 1.0. And with Tier 8, well, we see extremely large and extremely fast-moving weapons, especially in the case of the Pharmakon, or whatever you want to call the cannon. It has exceptional weapon speed, which, in hindsight, it shouldn't, because unlike most of the other weapons from the factions, it never misses. It can't miss because it's a homing weapon, unlike with the Nova missiles and things like that. But those are just most of my thoughts and things like that. But we're going to go ahead and I'm going to wrap up the video fairly quickly in the next what? There's still 10 minutes left of the fight. Well, I'm going to wrap it up sooner rather than later because I'm going to kind of die of old age while I'm sitting here. But let's go ahead and let's just talk about the targets for a minute. Again, each of the targets is using 3 damage types. Energy at the beginning with the operators. All of the Val Ravens are using the standard Nova drivers, so explosive damage. And the Gargoyles are using blight damage. They're using blight hammer missiles. So thankfully, if you're using Pharmakon, you'll at least be able to block the energy or the explosive, and the choice is entirely yours. I would recommend blocking the energy at the beginning of the fight if you used Pharmakon. However, again, because I wouldn't recommend actually using them, I'd recommend that you actually farm with something like the Orator and Ericos. It would just be a much more pleasant and better experience. Okay. What tips can I think of when engaging with targets with an Orator? Well, the easiest one is always make sure that your spawn ships are on the offensive setting. Make sure the Ericos are always behind your Orator because you want the Orator to be behind the Zealots and the other spawn ships, and you want it to be at the front of the field to be able to put down the Val Ravens quickly. Because the longer alive, the more damage they'll do, and the more damage they do, they'll ramp the damage, and it'll become more and more easy for them to kill the Zealots and things like that, and it'll become an issue because they could potentially overrun you with just the 3 ships and begin to focus fire on your Orator. That's not what you want. The other thing is to make sure that you fit the Orator properly. Because you would be using spawn ships, the operators at the beginning would be completely null and void because they would just get caught up in the massive spam of spawn ships, and you could run them down. Unlike with some of the other ships. And because you don't have to worry about the operators at the beginning, you can fit the Orator with the shockwave shells and things like that to give it just the highest amount of explosive resistance as is possible. And thankfully, that also means that while you're advancing, you can also focus fire the Gargoyle, so all your spawn ships will rush to it. And if the AI functions as you would hope it would, the Val Ravens will focus fire on the spawn ships that are rushing forward. They'll try and spread out, and that'll give you the chance to get in behind them with your Orator and destroy them. However, just like with what I do with the Pharmakon, it's a gamble. It may work out or it may not because it's the AI, and as we know, the AI does randomly change targets at times. There's like no way to explain it. You could have a spawn ship rushing a Val Raven and the carrier outside of its range, and it may randomly change to the carrier to attack while the spawn ship is within its firing range. Can we explain why they do that? I can't. The development team might possibly be able to. But that's about it. As for most of the other targets, that'd be recommended are going to be the Pharmakon, the Codec 104 and the 106, because you're going to need the Proxene 4 plasma variant for what I'm going to be doing with the second generation of operators, and you're going to need their Metaphase Screen 3. And you're not going to specialize it because so far the damage types in the Infestor targets have been Explosive, Explosive, and Explosive. All three of the targets were all using explosive damage in each of my tests, unless they've changed them. But at the moment, you're going to need something high-end to farm the Leviathan targets. That's about it. That's literally all I have to say for this one. You guys are going to have to wait for my thoughts and stuff tomorrow for the Leviathan. However, as I said before in the other video, I'm pretty sure that most of you are going to love it if you can get your hands on it. But that's going to be it. Enjoy the rest of this, like, 27-minute fight. I'm going to head off now. But thanks for watching. Hopefully it helped anyone else out. Maybe you have some suggestions for the Pharmakon or something like that that'll at least put them in a better state than they currently are. But be safe out in the void. Happy hunting, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.
Locking coordinates. Relocating. Underway. Locking coordinates. Copy. Course laid in. Locking coordinates.